In the early 2000s, the stealth genre was dominated by two major franchises. On the one side, you had Metal Gear Solid by Konami, and on the other side, you had Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell by Ubisoft. Despite Metal Gear being the older of the two, and the one that practically defined the genre, Splinter Cell had a different approach to the concept and followed its own gameplay and design philosophy. The former had a big focus on story and characters, with the protagonist Snake being essential to the plot of each game, and despite enemy behavior being fairly realistic, there was always a certain wackiness to both the plot, i.e. cyber ninjas or floating gas mask wearing telekinesis user, and how you could approach different situations, like pretending to be a cardboard box. Everything was more stylized, and one could feel the craziness of the director and producer Hideo Kojima throughout the entirety of the series. Splinter Cell, on the other hand, tried to keep things more grounded. When the first Splinter Cell was released in 2002, the plot wasn't that important, and Sam Fisher's role as a Splinter Cell spy agent man was more relevant than Sam Fisher himself, despite him actually being a pretty cool character, voiced by the great Michael Ironside.
Stay quiet. You don't want your life to end in the boys' room. I want you to answer some questions. Stay quiet. You don't want your life to end in the boys' room. I want you to answer some questions.
The story was kinda generic, but fulfilled its purpose of a more or less realistic scenario about a dictator in an Eastern European country plotting war with the United States, and a Secret Service agent having the mission to stop him. But the focus was more on the gameplay, with maneuverability, staying in the dark to avoid detection, and the smart use of gadgets being what counts. The series was a huge success, and enjoyed critical acclaim and went on to release sequels for over a decade, even though the later entries feel quite disconnected from their roots, and have become something else entirely. You may be surprised to learn that in 2003, about a year after the release of the first entry in the series, Splinter Cell received a version on the Game Boy Advance, which is what I'm going to talk about in today's episode of Advanced Oddities. When comparing it to Metal Gear's spin-off on the Game Boy Color, the first thing that you will notice is that instead of going for a top-down view, Splinter Cell Advance is controlled from a side perspective. Back when I was a kid, I loved the first Splinter Cell on the PS2, and when I saw screenshots of this game, I just thought, how is this supposed to work? As being able to move in all directions and outmaneuver guards and bad guys seemed to go hand in hand for me, and I remained skeptical until I finally got to play it. Turns out, this is a damn fine game. Yes, the game plays differently from the original, but similar to another Ubisoft game that I talked about in Advanced Oddities already, it takes some of the core ideas and transforms them into something new. One of the best and unique parts of the OG Splinter Cell was how you control the game's protagonist. And this is exactly what the developers decided to focus on here. Fisher can basically jump and climb all over the place and uses his acrobatic skills to stay undetected and take out enemies. The way Sam controls took me some time to get used to, especially at the very beginning. The first stage, I just kept dying for some reason. But replaying the stage now, it almost feels like second nature to me. Sneaking, running, jumping, climbing on pipes, drawing your weapon, aiming with grenades. These are all things that need to be learned first if you want to properly enjoy the game. I'd say it's kinda similar to a quote-unquote realistic physics platformer, like Flashback, just with a way faster pace. One of the first things you need to ingrain in your brain is, the R button is your best friend. With it, you control the sticky camera, which allows you to see what's happening off screen and where guards are patrolling, and it even highlights the field of vision of surveillance cameras. Then you can plan ahead on how to handle situations. Are you gonna hide in a dark corner in the background to avoid guards and then sneak past them once they've walked past you? Are you gonna hang on a pipe by the ceiling to avoid being spotted? Or are you carefully gonna take out the enemies patrolling the hallways? You got options. But confronting enemies head-on is of course the least efficient way to handle things, as you would expect from a game of this genre. It may not entirely play like Splinter Cell, but you can definitely feel the essence of the original in this. However, they made a ton of changes. Some of these were definitely necessary to adapt to this new gameplay format, and others are kinda weird. One of the biggest features of the original Splinter Cell that remained relevant throughout the series was how light and shadows affected the gameplay. Shooting out lights and staying in the dark to avoid detection was a huge part of the game. However, this doesn't really translate to the 2D concept that the developers were going for, so light and shadows are not really a part of the game anymore. There are sections where you can turn off the light and just merrily run around the building without having to bother with enemies, but most of the time detection is based on your position in regards to the enemy guards. This also affects how the game handles the detection of bodies. In the original, it was mandatory to hide the body of every person you took out, as the alarm would be raised whenever they were found. Without the proper use of lights and shadow, and in this 2D perspective, they decided to ditch the entire concept. Enemies do still react when they spot a body, but instead of raising the alarm, they will just run up and down for a bit until they calm down. Cameras are cool with people lying on the floor though. In case you are being spotted, there are several possible outcomes. If it's an armed guard, they will attack you and will then chill after a while if you manage to run away. If it's unarmed personnel, they will run to the closest alarm switch and trigger the alarm. If a camera or a guy behind a window spots you, the alarm gets triggered instantly. If the alarm gets raised, you will have a short time frame to find a switch and deactivate it. Depending on the mission, if the alarm goes on for too long, you will either get a game over screen or more enemies will appear to hunt you down. And enemies in general can be a huge problem, since you don't have much health. Or ammo. Ammo is quite a rare thing in this game, and has to be used wisely. The only weapons you have at your disposal are your gun, smoke grenades that contain knockout gas, and Sam's elbows that he slams into guys' heads. And from the right position you can also jump on people's heads to knock them out as if they were Goombas. Trying to throw grenades is a huge pain though. You press L to ready the grenades, and then you see these little circles that indicate how strongly you are throwing them. However, the arch that Sam throws them in is so weird, and it makes it difficult to tell where you need to stand if you don't want the grenades to bounce off somewhere. I just replayed the tutorial, and there's this one part where you need to hit multiple targets with them, and it's pretty infuriating if I'm being honest, as you always have to wait until the smoke clears before you can throw another one. But they are useful during the actual stages when you need to knock out multiple people at the same time. Actually, that brings me to one of the stranger changes in this version. Nobody dies in this game. Every person you take out basically just goes to sleep, as seen by the floating Zeds above their heads. Believe it or not, when they're hit by their own frag grenades, they only lie down to nap. Even story segments where somebody would die have either been removed or changed to be kids friendly. For example, in the stage where Sam is tasked to rescue American soldiers, rather than the soldiers being executed in front of live TV, they're merely going to denounce the United States, which of course needs to be prevented at all costs. I suppose you can't have this kind of violence on the GBA. No one would dare to bring realistically violent content to it. Least of all Ubisoft. It's a kids platform for crying out loud. That leads us to the story, or rather, the lack thereof. As generic as the story in the original may have been, it was always clear who you are, who the bad guys are, and what on earth is going on. This version, however, decides to strip things down even more. You get some info before the start of each mission, and a few lines of text from Lambert. But that's it. At no point does the game explain to you who Nicolatse, the main antagonist of the game, is, or any of the characters really. Their names are dropped, but that's about it. There's also zero dialogue between any of the characters. It's really bizarre. So if you neither played the console nor in the PC version, you will be absolutely in the dark, no pun intended, about what is going on. Several stages like the Kalinatech building or the Presidential Palace did not make it into the game, and others have been split up into multiple ones. Instead of infiltrating the Presidential Palace in Georgia at the end, you just have a second stage at the Abattoir, which is a little strange. Now, let's talk about the stages a little more. Not counting the tutorial or the unlockable bonus stages, there are 9 stages in total that offer a lot of variety in terms of gameplay and design. Usually you are given objectives that require you to explore several areas within the stage. In order to open certain doors, you need to find specific key cards first. These may be held by guards that need to be knocked out first, or they may be inside safes that you need to crack open. Unlocking doors and safes and disabling auto turrets involves playing minigames, which are neat little distractions. Some stages contain several sections where you see people patrolling in the background, and you need to use the objects in the foreground to stay out of view. It gets a little strange when you get to go through doors that should lead you to the rooms where the folks in the background are stationed, but the architecture behind the doors doesn't match the exterior, or even taking out everyone in the room doesn't do anything about the guys looking through the windows from the inside. Unfortunately, these sections can also get a bit frustrating, especially when it comes to their building exterior variations, where you need to move past windows and being spotted immediately leads to an alarm and to mission failure. That is quite annoying. And speaking of frustration and annoyance, remember how I mentioned that nobody's dying in this game? Circling back to that, it seems like nobody's dying, except for the final 2 missions, when you are suddenly tasked to take out dozens of people with a sniper rifle. This is so jarring, given how the developers went out of their way to make sure to reduce the violence to an insane degree. But I guess it's possible you are shooting with tranquilizer darts? Hard to say. Anyway, these sequences are both jarring and not particularly fun. The enemies shoot back at you, and once you're hit 3 times, it's game over. And these sections don't have much room for error. But all in all, this is really a fairly unique game, and similar to Rogue Spear Advance, Ubisoft created a game here that manages to capture the original spirit while also bringing something new to the table. The game has a couple of annoying things here and there, and the level design can get confusing at times. The story and the way it's presented here is nonsensical, and due to lack of voice acting you won't be able to hear Michael Ironside's amazing voice. But I have to admit that I'm really surprised how good this game is, and how playable it is even to this day. There are very few games like it, so it really deserves a lot more recognition. Splinter Cell's sequel, Pandora Tomorrow, received a Game Boy Advance version as well, which I couldn't play a lot yet, but from what I've seen, it dialed up the violence with lethal ammo and brought back some features like hiding bodies.
Thank you, Topper. I can kill again. You've given me a reason to live.
You also get dialogue between Sam and other characters this time around. Unfortunately though, from the little I got to play it, it felt quite frustrating in terms of game and level design. And looking at Metacritic, both critics and users seem to agree with my first impression. Still, the first Splinter Cell is quite good. And the fact that Splinter Cell was brought to the GBA in the first place, that it was put in a side perspective, and that it plays really well and is a fun experience, and a fairly unique one at that, is what makes it an oddity. An advanced oddity. Thank you for watching.